Good evening. I'm Patricia Van Skyke, Director of the Lloyd Library and Museum, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's program, The Potential of Permaculture, Common Orchards and Regenerative Farms. Our host and series coordinator, Alan Wight, wears a variety of hats, all germane to the Lloyd Library and to permaculture, especially with regard to plants, medicine, and the environment. He's on the faculty of the Christ Hospital School of Nursing, and he also works very closely with the University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati State on projects related to food and forest, and has a project of his own called Edible Cities. Our speakers look to the patterns of the forest, the lessons of nature, and cultures around the globe, bringing it all back home. We'll see orchards popping up around the city, new chestnut farms, and the world of Treasure Lake in Petersburg, Kentucky. I want to let you know that parts of tonight's program are pre-recorded, but our speakers are here with us tonight, and they will answer your questions at the end. If any time during the program you have a question, we encourage you to use the chat function of your screen. For most of you, it will be located at the bottom of the screen, and send us questions, which will be answered at the end. If you'd like for the other people that are attending the program to see your comments, please make sure that you use the drop-down option for all panelists and attendees, and then everyone will see the questions that you're asking. Before we begin, I would like to thank the members of the Lloyd Library. Programs like this are made possible through membership fees. If you're a member, thank you. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join, and you can do that by going to our website, www.lloydlibrary.org. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Cincinnati Permaculture Institute, Trio Permaculture, the Common Orchard Project, and Southern Ohio Chestnut Company. And with that, Alan Wight.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Potential of Permaculture. This is the second of a two-part series. This series is titled Common Orchards and Regenerative Farms. And before we dive in, I just want to talk a little bit about the photograph that you're seeing. This is an aerial view of Mark Shepard's New Forest Farm in Wisconsin, which is showing what it looks like to plant out trees and bushes on contour using a keyline design, which we will talk about a little bit later. I'd like to start off by thanking the Lloyd Library and Museum. I'd specifically like to thank Aaron and Patricia for making this program possible. I'd also like to thank our speakers, Chris Smith and Doug Crouch, who I'll be telling you a little bit more about in a moment. This is part of a larger project called Edible City and Art Atlas, which is being done in collaboration with Green Umbrella's Greater Regional Cincinnati Food Policy Council. And this project is exploring Cincinnati's food shed, past, present, and future. This segment specifically looks at permaculture and talks about some of the people, some of the educational resources, the networks, and the organizations that we have right here in the tri-state. A little brief overview about what permaculture is for those of you that may not know. Permaculture is a design science that's centered on whole systems thinking, looking at patterns and resilient features from natural ecosystems to help us create a more permanent, sustainable, and resilient culture. Permaculture, the word itself, was originally meant to stand for permanent agriculture, or more broadly, a permanent culture. This philosophy or design science approach to the human-animal-earth relationship synthesizes traditional ecological knowledge with modern design principles, and these practices were laid out by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in 1978. And one of the things that they did was they made it globally accessible by bioregion. So they were able to put a lot of information that was out there in a place and make it available for people to use wherever they were. Permaculture is built on three main ethics: people care, fair share, and earth care. Today, we are really going to dive into the aspects of food. So I just want to say that permaculture is not just about food. Permaculture is about buildings. Permaculture is about transportation. It's really about energy in terms of a main theme that combines all of it together. Permaculture is about building biodiversity. There are spiritual components. It is really a holistic way of looking at how humans can best coexist and give back to and even improve the natural ecosystem and ecosystem services which all of life relies upon. Today specifically, we'll be looking at orchards in the city as well as regenerative farms a little bit further out, either in the suburbs or even out into the rural areas. So when we think about permaculture in this regard, it's really important to think about food forests or forest gardens and to think in terms of architecture. So if you notice the picture on the screen, which has been provided to us by Doug Crouch of Trio Permaculture and Education, is that we have a system that can capture more of the sun's energy than say a cornfield or a soy field. So a forest canopy, the forest at all different levels is capturing the sun's light. So that's much more efficient at helping to generate the things that humans need from the forest to survive. Permaculture often talks about the 7 F's. We're talking about food, we're talking about fertilizer, we're talking about fodder, we're talking about fuel. We're also talking about pharmaceuticals and ultimately fun. It's important to think about food as energy. It's also important to think about food as health, and really how can we incorporate perennial edible gardening into our landscapes throughout everywhere that humans have gone on to develop around the planet. Permaculture also likes to think in terms of zones. So this is one of my favorite diagrams that shows the zones of permaculture, where the first zone is really the house, or even some permaculturists will point to the internal human body. The second zone could be your kitchen garden, and the zones are set up in terms of what you most frequent. So as you move further out to zone 5 might represent the forest or places that you only go every so often in terms of harvesting some of the 7 F's that were mentioned before. I want to emphasize that permaculture is applied to all scales. So yes, you can specifically talk about permaculture in the home garden scale, around your home for a homestead. We can talk about applying permaculture principles and designs to cities, to the suburban scale, to the farm scale, and ultimately to the entire planet. A reference here, this is Sepp Holzer's homestead in Germany. And it is showing you aspects of the key line design in terms of water management and capturing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our 2 speakers. Our first speaker, his name is Chris Smyth. He is a regenerative designer, group facilitator, and rebuilder of the commons. After studying and practicing permaculture for 11 years, he now teaches and practices his craft in Cincinnati through consulting with individuals and organizations. Most of his devotion goes towards implementing permaculture orchards on vacant lots, and he is the director of the Common Orchard Project, and we'll be talking a little bit more about what he does. Our second speaker is Doug Crouch, who is trained as a permaculture designer and fish and wildlife manager. He has extensive experience surrounding landscape planning and food production systems. He uses his regenerative design and implementation work around the globe. I'm just going to say that Doug is world-renowned, having traveled and taught permaculture in over 15 different countries and on 5 continents. He now lives on a 3rd-generation family land in northern Kentucky, and is providing steward and education for all of those that wish to visit him and learn more about it. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Chris. Chris, please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, Alan, and for the Lloyd to get a chance to share about some of the work that's happening in regenerative agriculture and communities all through the Cincinnati region and the state, really. It's good to be back here at the Lloyd. I think I've had the chance now to present and share here. This is my 3rd time. Last time I was able to share some of my experience going to the native apple forests of Kazakhstan and the walnut groves of Kyrgyzstan. So it's nice to be sharing about what's happening more locally. So I'm gonna flip on my slides and turn on the screen share, and we can get into these slides. All right. Okay, I'm trusting that's all working well. So like Alan said, first I'm gonna share about the Common Orchard project and some of our work in cities. And then I'll share a little bit about the Southern Ohio Chestnut Company and some larger scale agricultural projects. So I began the Common Orchard project in Cincinnati in Price Hill on the west side back in 2017 when I was still the sustainability coordinator at a local development corporation, Price Hill Will. And this to me at the time was just trying to address blight issues and vacancy issues. In the Midwest, we've had a ton of vacancy from the 2008 crash. A lot of houses needed to come down, and they were, but nothing was going back up in their place because there wasn't really the market rate housing. You couldn't build a home on a lot of these lots and then sell it for what you put into it. So that all these lots were just sitting vacant as basically lawns that people were forced to mow to keep clean in the city. So we started to think about what could we do in place of this that would be productive. Maybe in a bit of an interim, maybe on like a 10 to 12 to maybe even 20-year timeline to get some productive use out of this. And there's already plenty of community gardens in the neighborhood. So we thought, well, we need what would it look like to scale, say, hundreds of these vacant lots and use them as community orchards. So I set to redesigning them, involving a lot of other work from farmers like Stefan Sokowiak, who's a Canadian farmer, and then just redesigning the system as a whole. Using permaculture design as a practice, you can look at the specific goals and issues and come up with new solutions. So I think this is something of a new solution for an old problem of vacancy in the city. So what we have pictured here is a peach tree just in its very first year. You can see a tarp, a black plastic tarp, and then in the understory is passion flower, wormwood, and some other nitrogen fixing shrubs. So we might learn in permaculture that it's about looking at the patterns of nature, perhaps the lessons of a forest, and trying to apply that to farming. So instead of just sticking this peach tree out in the middle of a grassy field, which you would never find in a natural context, or visiting apple forests in Kazakhstan, these trees are in forest contexts. And because we're throwing them in the middle of a city, we're trying to give them some help. So we're giving them some beneficial plants and stuff to kind of help fertilize, soil improve, and help keep pests away. But I put this slide up and said this initial year, because of the tarps and because of how we designed it, it only took 4 hours of maintenance the whole year. Myself and my intern at the time, Mara here, were able to keep this garden weeded in 4 hours. And as compared to community gardens that I've worked on for years, that's hundreds of hours of a difference. So what we were doing was trying to scale this solution to hundreds of lots, and we knew that labor would be the hardest thing. The second year, we experienced a ton of growth from these peaches, apples, pears, plum, cherry, and black locust trees, as well as all the understory medicinals like currant bushes and gooseberry and aronia berry and honeyberry. Again, took very little time to weed, but now we're getting into pruning. So as the orchard ages, we have to take care of it differently, and we'll be spending more time up taller and taller pruning. And this past year, we actually got hundreds of peaches off 2 or 3 of the peach trees that are on the site. And as the rest of the trees mature, apples take a little longer. Then we'll be getting yields from all of those, but relatively, it's very few hours. I expect doing a holistic program that's weeding and spraying various biological sprays that are organic and safe to consume, but also help feed the plants. All that could probably take 50 hours a year of maintenance. There's a little above ground layout of what we're doing here. So to speak technically about these orchards that are happening all over the city of Cincinnati, we've got 10 of them so far, and we'll be putting in 20 more every year for the next couple of years, and then we'll see where it goes from there. The basic planting pattern is using a nitrogen fixer like black locust between apple, just because apple is a real workhorse of the orchard, just more fruit pounds per tree than any other fruit tree. And then putting other things like peach, pear, plum, cherry, Asian pear, all of the kind of fruit trees, just to keep things diverse, because if disease gets a hold of one of these trees, then that disease usually doesn't jump to, say, an apple or a cherry. Disease tends to be particular to certain trees, which is why most high volume orchards have to spray massively, because they've concentrated a food source, either for a disease or a pest. If you have thousands of one kind of tree, then as soon as something finds it, it's going to find all of it. So we're trying to diversify things. And there's actually even a strength in the city of doing orchards in this way, because pests have to go through a jungle of buildings and cars and a lack of food source to find some of these trees. So there's even a strength in the decentralized model here. And then between all of these trees and the understory, we're putting various things that help confuse pests or fix various elements in the soil. And I can go into more detail, but just some real favorite ones are licorice, mince, elecampane, blue false indigo, things with that are high in volatile oils. And we're even putting in garlic and tomatoes in some of these spots. This was an orchard we did at a farm site. We were taking over a 2-acre farm site in Camp Washington, an area in Cincinnati with only 8% tree cover. So this farm is going to be a perennial farm focusing on trees and woody species that improve canopy while also providing a food yield. Another important thing about a lot of this is most of these orchards are self-replicatable. As you can see, the plastic is not, but I think it's a minor carbon cost in order to get us up and running. These orchards basically take place of a lawn. You have just turf, and we are putting productive food in the middle of all that. And that's one of my apologies for it is, yeah, we're using plastic, but it would just be lawn, and that'd be even more carbon intensive. But this is an apple tree that I grafted earlier in the year. So once you get these orchards established, you'll have enough genetic material to continue propagating them forever. This is just a quick design of that 2-acre site. We'll be doing intensive berry production, education, kind of creating a model homestead, something that looks like what any home in Cincinnati could create, as well as larger scale models like here's maybe a large pawpaw tree planting, or demonstrating what we're doing with the single vacant lots with the plastic as well. To talk a little bit about the productive capacity, what we're seeing on these orchards is kind of a return on investment of the initial install in 5 to 6 years. And then you're seeing, with minimal maintenance and volunteer hours, you're seeing a yield beyond that. So we're talking about thousands of pounds of fruit per orchard. So we're looking at hundreds of thousands of pounds across the potential hundreds of orchards that we're building. We'll have 30 done by next year, and yeah, it's really going to keep growing. I want to share too, just this past weekend of our recording, here in the end of October, I was up in Cleveland building 2 more orchards, starting with an effort up there. So even the propagating of orchards inside Cincinnati can happen by grafting and taking cuttings and replanting things, but even the concept itself is spreading to other regions. The area we're working in is called Clark Fulton, and it's an area that has about 1,400 vacant lots to begin with. Really tons of great community gardens, orchard efforts that are already there that I think fall by the wayside a little bit, mostly just because of how they're technically arranged. So what we're trying to do is arrange these to minimize the downsides of managing things by volunteers and maximize the productivity. So maybe these orchards will have a few less pounds of food than a really productive community garden, but we could probably put 20 in their place for the time that it takes to manage one community garden. And this is just a quick video I wanted to show of a planting I did actually with Alan this weekend. we put 18 trees in by a school, and as you can see this footage moving up, it was just a vacant lot. It was just a patch of grass next to a playground and another community garden that's been managed for years. But now it's a productive orchard, just sticks in the ground for now. But this kind of work could fit in almost anywhere. All these little pockets, especially in Rust Belt cities like Cincinnati, could see this work done. So that's the Common Orchard project. I'll just say a few more things while showing this slide for the chestnut farm. The point of the Common Orchard project is productivity in neighborhoods. This is a food access issue. This is so that we can grow fresh food in neighborhoods. It's not going to supplement everything for people, but it's a way that people can grow fresh food next to them, learn how to replicate that, find value in vacant land, and also learn to manage these things as a commons. We don't do that too much these days. We don't manage things collectively. And I think there's less and less opportunity for us to learn how to work outside together. So that's the point of this work. And also at the end of the day, you get apples and peaches and berries. And that's a little bit better than just having another meeting, in my opinion. So now I want to move on and share a little bit about the Southern Ohio Chestnut Company. This is something that myself and my business partner and good friend Badger Johnson have started in Athens, Ohio. This is our first planting. So we are working with a nature preserve that's out there. The nature preserve is 100 acres, and we are on 25 of that, planting Chinese hybrid chestnuts. So these are Chinese chestnuts. This is a photo of one. This is the product that actually right now is kind of when they have all dropped. They've been harvested in other areas. Our trees are these trees pictured on the right here. They're young trees, but at this point of the year, this picture was taken in the spring when we planted. At this point in the year, they are popping out of their tubes. So they're already 5-6 feet tall. This is Badger and I picking up these trees. We had about 1,200 trees fit into the back of a van and a U-Haul, a real wild adventure from our friends in Carrollton, Ohio at Route 9 Co-op. They have about 100 acres of chestnut, old growth. It's chestnuts that are 40, 50 years old. This is what we did. We spent all of June, about 5 weeks planting. All said and done, the orchard will be 1,000 trees, about 22 acres in total. If you can see a little bit of this, we've got these tree tubes that we've protected all the trees from deer. We put them on drip irrigation, which was quite a feat. And the only way that we could plant them in June, because that's just what our time schedules allowed. With other work we were doing, putting these little baby trees out into the middle of a field without irrigation would not have worked. But most of a chestnut is water. So we figured long term, we wanted these things on irrigation, even though in the Midwest, we do get quite a bit of rain. I'm just going to share this photo. So here's just some video in the background of the larger context of the farm. So yeah, the Southern Ohio Chestnut Company, we're starting as chestnuts, but that's not where we're stopping. We've even gotten some critique from some friends in this world that they're concerned that this is some kind of monoculture. And I do laugh at that because one, that's a judgment made by just kind of like looking at a snapshot in time. But what we're doing initially is removing invasives like autumn olive with forestry mulcher, placing this land back under management, a good deal of conservation efforts, in my opinion, just kind of leave trees out to die or to wait or come spray heavy invasives, but really aren't putting things into active management. And I think a way of increasing our conservation land, or say prairie land, is to put it into some sort of managed practice like agroforestry with chestnuts. So even though we were ripping out invasives, this entire field is basically prairie and will be as such for the next 10 years. This is us subsoiling. This was a cow grazed pasture years ago. It's been abandoned for quite a while, hence the autumn olive being so large. And we're ripping into the soil to increase percolation, infiltration of rainwater. Also, we'll be planting right into these. So this is also just a strategy because we had 40 to 50 people out helping us plant. We got about 500 trees in one weekend in the ground with a large planting party that we did. So yeah, that's at the end of the day, though we had a lot of help with that planting party, this is Badger and I, this is the process. It's going one by one. We could have done it many other ways, and we will in the future with other machines, but it could be as simple as putting trees in the ground with a shovel. All that you see between this, a lot of this is mulched, but really what's inside this, there are 9 different species of milkweed in this grassy area between. There's other prairie species inside there. There are some invasives like Johnson grass that we've sprayed for, and we'll be just putting this under active management. What the maintenance for this looks like is about once a year, we'll mow the thing for the next 10 years. And then we're going to start seeing some production that's actually worth harvesting. You can see this is the whole 22 acres, 23 acres. There's a whole nother field that we will plant later. And what we'll do actually between each of these trees, like I was saying before about monocrops, it's all Chinese chestnuts. And between each of these chestnuts, we'll put a pawpaw. Pawpaw, I'm sure Doug will talk about too, is the largest Native American fruit. And it's a delicious, beautiful fruit, very few disease or pest pressures, and can take a bit of shade. So we're gonna put a pawpaw between every single one of these. So with 1,000 chestnuts, we'll have 1,000 pawpaw, and we'll be doing that installation next year. To speak about productive capacity, I'm sure we'll get into this a little later when we just start to explore what is possible in Ohio. This was an area that was conservation, it was inside a conservation easement, but it wasn't really being used for much. It was a failed prairie planting that happened in the 90s. There's other areas on the property that we are actively prescribed burning for continued management of those prairies. And those areas are way better or more ideal for protecting native species. But in some areas that are more marginal hayland where someone's just cutting hay for very little or grazing animals in a not so productive fashion, we believe that putting something like chestnuts or other agroforestry crops is a much better use for a lot of that land in Ohio. In its more final years, maybe in 12 to 15 years, should be experiencing about 3,500 pounds per acre of chestnuts. So once you start to add all that up, even with a little bit of genetic working, some plant breeding, some classic plant breeding, most people in this field think that could grow even higher. So like I said, what's next for us is we're putting pawpaw. That's what this is. This is at Kentucky State University's pawpaw planting. Went down there earlier this summer. And then we're also exploring partnerships with other landowners. There's a farm just around the corner where the landowners actually had been on the farm that we are on, that we put chestnuts on when they were young. And they saw what we were doing and wanted to know about their land. So we'll probably be planting 6 acres for them this coming year. And we're in conversation with the Nature Conservancy in Adams County who manage 20,000 acres. Not that we're gonna put 20,000 acres in on their land, but there's a ton of opportunity in marginal hayland that just cut, that you could throw something like this in the middle of it and see a very profitable and productive use in 10 years. So that's what we're up to next. Our goal is 640 acres, which is a square mile, which when you kind of run those numbers, we think we can do that. We could install that pretty easily for about $5 million over our lifetime. So that's Badger and I's goal. And to just put some of that more into context, that's about 2 million pounds of chestnuts that you would harvest off that much land. And that is going to be able to feed people. So thank you for your time. I'm glad I got to share about this.
Thank you very much, Chris, for sharing those amazing projects from what you're doing in the city to what you're doing out in rural areas. And that's really exciting to talk about. You said 2 million pounds?
Yep.
So I love how you take the lens of productive capacity. in your work here. So I'd like to transition now. Doug's going to take it away and talk about Treasure Lake. And this is located just southwest of Cincinnati in Petersburg.
Thank you, Alan.
All right. Thank you, Doug.
Let me click on that one. And voila. Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share about some of the work that I have done in the past and am doing now. Thanks to the Lloyd Library for hosting. And yeah, thanks to all my colleagues who have presented so far, because they're doing just quite amazing work, and grateful for that network which permaculture builds off of. So this is a little bit of my work, a little background first. I grew up here in Cincinnati, went to school for fish and wildlife management, not too far from where Chris is planting those chestnuts in Southeast Ohio. And I managed to make it around the world practicing and teaching permaculture in 5 continents, which for me is special personally, because whenever you're traveling, you get to have an opportunity to look within culture itself and agriculture and the fusion of those two, and looking at traditional ways in which people have done agriculture and existing new technologies. And the amount of different cultures that I learned from has just been fantastic. And I brought that back to the tri-state here in Northern Kentucky to continue my work here. So I run a company called Trio Permaculture, and traditionally what that company has been involved with is doing a lot of education throughout the world, but on top of that, teaching of classes, whether those are the longer PDCs or short courses. I've done a lot of project management, of taking raw barren land in a client that has a vision and helping to implement that vision with the permaculture principles and ethics in mind, like this top picture on the left from the Dominican Republic. Top picture on the right, I've done seasonal farm management. That one is in Argentina, and was quite a fun adventure, living 4 hours by horse to the nearest pueblo, and do quite a lot of design work for clients that ties into the project management or the farm management, and have a educational mission to provide educational tools and media through my sister organization, Trio Permaculture EDU. And here's some pictures of just some of the design work that I submit to clients. And yeah, I find this to be quite fun, creative work. That's one thing I really enjoy about permaculture, is this fusion of pattern-based thinking with material-based thinking to produce holistic design and implementation. Is you get to tap into your creativity, but then you also have to know a lot of specific information, and building that fusion over time has just really been a joy, and what keeps me going in permaculture. So here's a little image of Trio Permaculture EDU. You know, we're trying to provide diverse amount of educational materials, different offerings of media, and really collecting, enhancing the genius of the permaculture community. So it's a bit of a blog and also a book at the same time, because it's written based off of my experiences, my research, my implementation, and the feedback that natural systems and people are giving me. So there's this website that you can go to if you would like to learn more about permaculture or specific topics like food forests or forest gardens. triopermacultureedu.com. There's over 160 articles. If I had more time, I would be publishing more, working on my next one right now, rotational grazing. And I love to write, and I love to recount the stories, of the moments in time when a certain amount of wisdom was imparted either from somebody else or that continual grind of permaculture and implementing and getting the feedback. Some of the work that I do around this tri-state area is edible landscaping, which essentially for me is edge enhancement. The suburbs offer a tremendous amount of possibility for growing food because everybody owns a little bit of grass. And as Chris was mentioning about the carbon, yeah, the lawn is the largest agricultural sector in the United States of America. And I feel like we have a grand opportunity to enhance these sorts of bland landscapes with edibles. And this trend is definitely taking off right now as society evolves with our current conditions. I love planting pawpaws. I love putting in terraces, especially in these steep hillsides that we have around here, and being able to build soil and access at the same time. Here's where I live, Treasure Lake, Petersburg, Kentucky, which is a couple exits from the airport, CVG, and across the river from Lawrenceburg, Indiana. My family bought this land in 1983. My grandparents did, and the Crouch family has been stewarding it ever since, and my father and his two sisters still own it. The businesses and the vibe of the place is evolving over time. And yeah, it's really quite a fun journey in what I feel is a super spectacular place to be able to wake up and to be able to farm and steward this land, this lake, this forest, and all that comes with it. So, of course, I've done a design. This is what I would call a pattern level design or zones of use. And, so within the land, we've broken it up into different sections. And that is based on topography or aspect or access to water or energy. And just trying to use this as a base, but not necessarily 100% static. So some things have even changed and evolved the more and more time I spend here, practicing and implementing and getting those feedback loops. So here's some of our missions. Before this year, even the start of this year, we were very much going down the educational center routes here at Treasure Lake. That has all been put on hold right now due to COVID-19. But I look forward to the opportunity to teach more in-person classes like this one where I partnered with my good friend, Abby Artemisia, and we're talking about foraging and different, skills getting out in the woods, looking for food, planting, and that sort of thing. We also have a nursery on site, partnering with Cincinnati Permaculture Institute, the Growing Value Edible Nursery. We've really been able to scale this up this year. The nursery grew 3-4 times in its square footage, and it's been really, a fun journey to learn about what works and what doesn't within the nursery trade. We do a lot of work on non-timber forest products because most of the 60 acres is actually in forest. So building off my degree of fish and wildlife management, we do different things like the gabions, the one on the right, the picture on the right. We're just out doing some of that yesterday to slow and filter the water to give better water quality to the lake. and the lake is no longer open as a pay fishing lake. I do let some friends stop by and fish still, as a form of recreation and food for a certain amount of people. We do sell hunting leases and trade with that because wildlife is part of our mission, both the management and the harvesting of these wild meats. We do a lot of fruit and nut promotion in the non-timber forest products. We have pawpaws in incredible numbers here through 20 years of management that I've done on and off. Ever since I started in my fish and wildlife management degree before I got involved with permaculture, and wanted to start promoting the pawpaws because it is a good wildlife food. So, um, yeah, normally this year it wasn't a good year, but we get really, really abundant harvest, and it's part of what feeds into my own personal nursery as well. Did about 700 pawpaw seedlings this year. 700 survived. Um, I love this plant because it's a bridge plant. It's a bridge between edibles. It's a bridge between natives and edible landscaping because it truly is a beautiful plant that really can provide some abundance over time once they get established. We do forage things like hickory and the bur oak. We don't have a lot of bur oak trees in this area, but for whatever reason here at Treasure Lake, we have very big mature ones. This was an off year for bur oak, but look forward to that next year. Um, Other non-timber forest products that we're involved with: herbs, spices, and mushrooms. We're in Boone County, and Boone County was picked over by Daniel Boone for crops like ginseng. And I'm just a big fan of replanting in these sorts of herbs that belong in our forest. Uh, Ginseng, golden seal, black cohosh, blue cohosh, bloodroot, and we have some populations of some of those, but especially like ginseng, that seed resource has just been gone for so long that we really need to enter those back into the landscape and let those seeds set. Definitely harvest a lot of spice bush, harvest a lot of mushrooms, and yeah, just really have a lot of fun going out and foraging for the mushrooms, and also doing some cultivation and looking to expand that. We do, beyond the non-timber forest products, fruit, nut, and berry production. Have chestnuts planted, have hazelnuts, all different kinds of fruit trees, annual and perennial veggies mixed in little food forest sections, aquaculture, different forms of that plant or animal is something that we've been working on, and animal husbandry is a big step that we've taken this year with the COVID-19 restrictions on gatherings. Setting aside the educational part has allowed us to pivot into more of the regenerative farming aspects beyond just the plant part, and got the goat herd back this year. We're not at any sort of commercial level yet, but that's due to a time and finances aspect. But we did bring some goats to the land that successfully had offspring. We've been building new goat structures, putting up fences, rotating the animals with electric fence, cycling the manures into compost piles. I was mulching fruit trees today with the waste from this particular barn in the middle goat shed that you're seeing. We moved them to fresh pasture, which means you got to get in there and clean up those manures, and already have a dump truck's worth of compost going. So decided to just do the sheet mulch directly to the fruit trees, Asian pears and jujubes. Got it today. And you can see chicken coop, very small scale approach to the chickens, but getting a pretty immediate return on investment with the laying of eggs and being able to feed ourselves and others who come here. And definitely this all hinges upon community building. You can see some of my mates in the Petersburg area helping to put up fence for the goats to help bring this particular goat, Zelda, here. Without their help, without their knowledge, without their energy and skills, it just simply wouldn't be possible. And the energy cycling of bringing energy to other people, giving without the expectation that you're going to get something back is super critical to permaculture. And that's been probably the greatest journey of coming back here, stopping my world travels and my work overseas, is to really delve into the community aspect and just figure out ways in which we can work together and be in cooperation rather than competition. And Treasure Lake is a super beautiful place. It's growing, and I really look forward to seeing that manifestation of the design intention and going and planting and teaching more people. So thank you for allowing me to share. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to ask you the first question here, but I just want us to take a moment and reflect on what we've learned in terms of the various scales, from what Chris is doing in the city to what Chris is doing out in Southern Ohio to what Doug is doing just south of here, right? We are, if you tuned into the first session, we've really covered the practices, we've covered the philosophy, and you've seen a lot of the how, right? You've seen what these folks have done in terms of the various scales for really transforming the land into something that is giving back rather than humans simply taking from. So for this last segment, we're going to talk about the future. And of course, this is a really good question, given that we are in the middle of a paradigm shift. The coronavirus has provided us with an incredible opportunity to redream and re-envision what should and could be. So I'd like to start with you, Doug. If you could talk broadly, but also specifically, where do you see us going? What is the future in terms of your work in permaculture and really the broader region? You mentioned Cincinnati Permaculture Institute. You mentioned Growing Value Nursery. You hinted at some of these broader networks in terms of people and energy and community. And I'd like you to pontificate on where we are headed.
Yeah, I really feel our future is finding those leverage points, whether it's broader scale farms like Chris mentioned, of really creating, nutrient dense calories in a big way, lots of pounds. I definitely feel like we need urban permaculture for those spots of greenery and inspiration. And then we need the suburbs to become like what I saw in communist villages in Bulgaria, where every single house had a garden, had animals, had fruit trees, had their food forest, because that was essential to life, was not just feeding yourself, but feeding other people. And so for me, the future of say Treasure Lake, it's an educational center where you can find information, you can find inspiration, you can get hands-on training, and it's an outlet for things like trees. You want to buy some goats in the future because you want to start a goat herd and not see honeysuckle is a problem and spray or whatever, but rather every time I cut honeysuckle and just see the goats go crazy on it. Yeah, I really think we can be a resource for how to turn those problems into solutions. And I think the greatest thing that needs to happen is that fusion of pattern-based thinking with material-based thinking to create a holistic framework so that we can look at problems and see solutions. So imparting just a little bit of my philosophy is something that I'd really like to do as well.
Thank you. And I just want to add, in past conversations with you, you've envisioned Treasure Lake being the extension for permaculture that the normal agricultural extensions have been for larger scale farms as we know them. And I've mentioned this before, I'm going to mention it again. We are seeing an incredible, I don't know if it's a rebirth, but we're seeing these non-land grant institutions turn towards this kind of agriculture and perennial agriculture. Cincinnati State, Xavier University, University of Cincinnati, all have programs. Chatfield College, if you think about the work that Susan Vonderhaar has done, where the permaculture philosophy and practices are being taught to a different generation of farmers and people interested in this work. And we now have Treasure Lake as a place to go as an example, right? As a living, breathing homestead system of what people can do if they have access to that kind of land. So anything else you want to add before we head off to Chris?
I think that giving people access to new information is super important. And we may have thought it was agriculturists who were going to fix the problem, but maybe it's designers, planners, and that's where the fusion of permaculture is really coming in these non-land grant universities.
Thank you. Chris, I'd like to turn to you. Can you please impart some vision of what you see for the future regarding the collective work that everybody's been doing?
Sure. I could dip into numbers all day long. But first, I just want to say that I think the most critical piece here we talked about in the permaculture ethics is people care. There are lots of these projects, like the technical or biological or even agricultural processes are there or almost there. There's a couple things that need more testing and more iterative process to figure out, but really it's the people care or the connectivity, the social fabric, markets, incentives, that kind of stuff. Many projects get flipped upside down because a relationship goes sour or a contract was written poorly or some asymmetry in power existed and someone was ripped off their land. So that's I think the base of all this. On top of that, I think it's three things that need to happen going forward. And that's education, equitable or integral tech, and capital. So with education, I wouldn't be here doing any of this. I was a music composition major in college. If I hadn't learned some of what this is, the design frameworks that are taught inside permaculture, I wouldn't be here. And I was also given opportunity to work in the field, and there's not many jobs in the field. So that kind of process is what we need. We need more people educated in this so that we can just experiment more. Genetic diversity will allow for somebody to start applying these principles in hospitals or in various businesses or in fashion. We need lots of sustainability seeping into many areas. With tech, just to dig into this a little bit, I've been excited about, basically there's a technology that is providing grazers of cow, like shock collars. That sounds like a violent term, but like invisible fences for cows. There's technology that John Deere has and another company called Vence, V-E-N-C-E, that would allow people to rotationally graze, which is a permaculture or agroforestry practice that is far more productive on land, healthier ecologically for carbon sequestration, and also just better for the cows. They get more food on less land. Ohio has 40,000 square miles in cow. You could take 5,000 of those square miles, put chestnuts on them, and grow 11 billion pounds of chestnuts. So the productive capacity of our land is there. It's the people, it's the political will, and that leads me to the final thing, that it's capital. It's vision for it, which floods back into education, but it's we're not making these choices because certain capital has different interests to keep things in corn, soy, and corn at this point in our country is basically a value add for oil. It's not something we need in the abundance that we created. We don't consume it as much as we actually produce it. Same is true for milk. We've gotten really good at a lot of agricultural processes, and we grow too much of something, so we have to figure out other places to stick it in. I think we could change and put more land into conservation, grow 5,000 acres of prairie, or 5,000 square miles of prairie, sorry, which I'm not even sure the number of actual acreage that is, but it's huge. And then we could do other agroforestry practices inside that. And I think another pattern that we need to adopt is stuff like what Doug is doing, trying to transition family land that has maybe been in and out of productive management for a long time. And maybe it's got a wonderful asset like a Pay Lake on it, but these forest systems that exist throughout Ohio and Kentucky, these could be actively managed for forest or other conservation practices. And there's plenty of state agencies that are working on that, but we need more replicable patterns from the landowner's perspective. So in terms of permaculture, that's what I focus on, are patterns, and proving out models is what we need right now. We need more innovative processes that are documented and shareable and teachable, so that anybody with family land or people who are trying to look to pass on their land to their next generation, and maybe their family doesn't want to manage that land, we need to provide a way to put that into productive use so that it doesn't just go to a large agribusiness that's going to strip mine the land and take all the timber and turn it into corn, soy.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for sharing those visions. Once again, I'd like to thank our presenters, and I would like to thank the Lloyd Library and Museum. And I'd also like to thank all of the participants who tuned in to learn a little bit more about permaculture, learn a little bit more about some of the experts we have in the region, and ultimately learn a little bit more about the resources that are available. If anybody is wanting to take a permaculture design certificate course, that is the PDC that Doug had mentioned earlier, we have a wealth of teachers. Cincinnati Permaculture Institute partners with all of these people that you've seen present here. And so you essentially get to learn from many different experts, and you get to tour and see the sites that these ladies and gentlemen have been talking about. So it's a really immersive course. You can choose short versions, you can choose long versions. If you love it, you can go on to get your teacher certification. And ultimately, if you want to transform your own yard or your own farm, or talk to your parents or talk to your kids, we have everything you need here. We have a nursery where you can go and learn about what plants are going to do well with which other plants. Sometimes I like to talk about the best place to start as well. What tastes good, right? What should you be choosing to plant based upon what you are interested in eating at your own table? So I would encourage the audience to please reach out to all our presenters, check out their web pages, contact them, visit their sites, and ultimately sign up for a volunteer day and help us plant more food forests as far as the eye can see. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you dropping some of your questions in the chat. I'm going to moderate a couple question and answer sessions for about 30 minutes. And I'd like to start off with one of the questions that Charlie Gonzalez had early in the beginning. I'll go ahead and direct this one to Chris. It's specifically dealing with the Common Orchard project. As Chris installs, this is quoting Charlie, as Chris installs 20 more orchards a year, what is the plan for maintenance? So are you going to hire a crew? What are the partnerships? What do the volunteers look like? And ultimately, how will you harvest? And then what will you do with the produce?
Charlie, thank you for such a wonderful and complex question. All those pieces. First, it's about designing a system that's scalable. So like I said in the video, and this is an estimate, I mean, these systems evolve, and I've not dealt with one of them in year 10 yet, so I don't know exactly how that will work, but I think through design, that lowers the initial maintenance cost. So say that's 50 hours a year per site. Some of that can be accomplished through volunteer blitzes, where we're pruning all the trees together, and maybe that's a third of all the work for the year. A bunch of the orchards as well will be managed by local stewards, whether those are institutions that these orchards are located near partner sites, and they will have their own volunteer crew, or it's a series of neighbors or sort of a champion for some orchards. Everyone will kind of look different, but we will provide the framework. Either they are materials and like foliar sprays and other things for the fruit tree's health or education, or we will fill in the gap when we need to on certain orchards. So it'll be kind of a complex system for the management. But I'm not too, I mean, if we had like 1,000, that would, like, I don't know what that would look like. But for 100, I feel really confident that a community of people with different roles can manage that quite easily. As far as the yield, the individual orchards yielding to neighbors, that's the point. It's public food. It's for people who are involved in the orchard. If it's at a church, let's say, then it would be for them to decide how they distribute it. But our role in planting an orchard for someone would be to say, you are going to give this to other people. You are going to share this with neighbors. And then we also have a 2-acre site that we will probably be growing to sell.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And I would also respond that there have been some preliminary conversations amongst partners about how do we make this happen, right? How do we support each other in these various endeavors to plant, maintain, harvest, and then, you know, one of the bigger questions is what do we do with the food? And so these conversations have already started. And as we continue to plant out the region, we will come to the bridge and we will cross the bridge and we'll figure out how to do it. Thank you, Chris. I'd like to direct this next question to Doug. Rita, and Chris, I'd also like you to chime in at the end. Rita asks, what type of apple trees and peach trees grow well in Cincinnati? She references her own failures with some of these things, and she's curious about keeping critters away. She says she's lost most of her apples to critters. So, Doug, recommendations?
Yeah. I lost most of my apples to critters initially as well. So first and foremost, anytime that I plant a fruit tree now, whether it's an apple or a peach, I always put a 6-foot welded wire fence around it. I go to Tractor Supply, buy that, usually cut it in about an 8-foot length. And if you cut it carefully at the end, then you can use the wire to actually wrap around, and you cut off the bottom so you have that many stakes that go into the ground. I do not plant a valuable fruit tree without it. You can get, let's see, about 12 trees per row at 8 feet. A row of fence is $130 with tax. So it does add to your management. Yeah, I don't know which critters you mean. If that's birds, if that's squirrels, I can't really say because my peaches and apples are not at that maturity point. But I suppose I will be willing to share some of the fruit. Because otherwise, like what happened to the native parakeet that was here in the United States of America was extinguished because of trying to grow peaches in the Southeast and the parakeets loving to eat them. So
interesting. Thank you, Doug. I'm just going to echo fencing, T-posts, protect your investments, ladies and gentlemen. Chris, thoughts on peat cultivars for peaches and apples, and also on protection?
Yeah, so a couple fundamental thoughts. The chestnut farm, we figure it costs us about $70 to plant every tree, and the tree itself costs $2, if that gives some perspective. There's a lot that goes inside that, but that's an old saying. $10 tree, $30 hole. Like protect the trees that you have. Peaches, also posted in the chat about a nursery that I like called Schlabach. They've got some of the best bare root prices, trees that will ship to you in the spring as bare root dormant trees that you plant. And they've got 4 varieties of peach that are resistant to leaf curl, which is often a problem in this area. But lots of other great peach varieties, Contender, Whitehaven, Cresthaven. I've done, peaches do pretty well for a short period of time. They maybe don't live as long, but they do pretty well. And then I also posted in the chat a bunch of apple varieties. I would say just generally, don't buy things from Home Depot or Lowe's. They are selling you things that you are most familiar with in a grocery store. Honeycrisp is a very tasty apple, but it will not grow here. It is a tree. It is a tree with no immune system, and you will have to be the immune system for the tree. And that works in conventional agriculture systems where you have 1,000 Honeycrisp, and several farmers are coming by and spraying nonstop. But if you want to grow things well in your own home, then you have to look around to the analogs of this region and stuff that grows well. So that's just a short list. There's a bunch other like Sundance is one I've been growing a lot more. Yeah, the list, there's like 20 or 30 apples that do pretty well around here that we've seen from other people growing them.
Thank you, Chris. I will also add the Home Depot and Lowe's comment, those trees have been babied. And if you were to travel to Growing Value Nursery, there's a location at Price Hill. There's also a location down at Treasure Lake. Doug is one of the caretakers of these. These plants sit outside all year long. They are taken care of and mulched in and watered and weeded, but they are not fed fertilizers of any kind. And so what you see is what you get, and you know that it has survived there for a while. Doug, I'd like you to add a little bit to that. And then Doug, there's also another question for you, but go ahead and talk a little bit more about kind of the practices that go into Growing Value Nursery and why this might be a better selection than other nurseries.
Yeah, we don't use any synthetic fertilizers, which most of the customers that we sell to are going to be in that same boat. So when a plant has been spoon-fed its nutrients through synthetic fertilizers, it expects to do the same. And the teaming up with microbes in symbiosis takes much longer time. So all of our practices are organic, even though it's not certified. The fertilizer comes from our soil mix, which we prefer to have a heavier soil mix. Like when you buy a tree from our nursery, it will not be the same weight as what it is in a peat moss filled pot from Tractor Supply. Like we're getting plants ready to go into the heavy clay soils of Cincinnati and the tri-state region, although I've got sandy soil, but having that little bit of extra clay in the potting mix helps me as well. We do feed with things like compost extract from my homegrown worm bin, just to further put the biology in there. And yeah, when we select our varieties of apples and peaches, we look for those that are the most disease resistant, that are adapted to essentially the Southeast, because Cincinnati is, moving more into that humid and longer growing season of the Southeast. Although this year we had quite the late frost, just to throw that curveball in there. So we do look for those varieties, some of the ones that Chris mentioned, and yeah, we give them a rough time, but we keep them alive and we keep them nourished enough where once they go in the ground, they're going to take off. And I've seen that here in my own plantings.
Nice. Thank you, Doug. Doug, I want to follow up, and Chris gave a nice little answer to this question earlier in the chat. Rita says, I planted 3 pawpaws a few years ago and I've not gotten any fruit. I think critters are eating the fruit. Any suggestions to make my pawpaws more robust and fruit bearing? Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been cultivating pawpaws for quite some time, and one could be the pollination. So if you've never seen the fruit set, A, they might not be flowering yet. B, they might not be getting enough light where they're producing enough flowers. or you may not have the pollinator. So even my parents' trees in the suburbs, I always have my mom throw food waste underneath the trees in early spring to start helping to build fly populations because they are pollinated by flies. Out here, I essentially make a maggot bucket because I'm in the countryside and it doesn't matter if I have extra flies. Or you can go to a art supply shop and buy a natural material, the fiber of the paintbrush, and actually hand pollinate between the different trees. Um, so sometimes it's just a time thing, sometimes it's a light thing, and sometimes it is a lack of the pollinator.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. Mary Jo posted a comment that I just want to, it wasn't quite a question, but she stated, mulching my soil improves it. When I use landscape cloth, there's a marked difference above and below the material. And Chris, given the use of plasticulture in the orchards, I'm wondering if you can speak to the differences that you've seen in terms of mulch versus either plastic and or the cloth, and then ultimately why you've settled with the plastic versus these other methods, which I would just say all of them are tried and true in some respects. And it depends, I'll stay on aesthetics and other reasons for why you would choose one. But Chris, enlighten us a little bit.
Yeah, it's a design question, right? And in design, there are hundreds and hundreds of variables and choices, and you're trying to get a desired outcome. And for us with the orchards, the plastic is what's like a virtuous evil. I don't know what to call it, but it's not ideal. But the labor of applying that much mulch on a yearly basis to a row of trees, scaling that to 100 vacant lots randomly placed around the city is just not something I could do. To go back to Charlie's question, that would totally explode my numbers of maintenance, and I would not feel good asking hundreds of people every year to apply wood chips everywhere. But on certain scales, totally makes sense. With the landscape fabric, so there's different plastics, right? So landscape fabric is polywoven fabric. It allows water to penetrate and seep in underneath it, which is a pretty terrible weed barrier. Any kind of weed seed can blow into that. If there's like just a little bit of debris on top, a weed seed can germinate and then root through that porous fabric plastic material. It works for a couple years. I use it as well on other sites and in other applications. But what we're doing with the orchards are painter's plastic, essentially. So it's sheer, 6 mil thick, that is seamed in the center. And usually it's tilted on contour, that where it's sort of anti-shingled. So it's still able to receive most of the runoff from that hits the rain there. And there's enough perforations with the other plants that there's still the ability to capture rain. And then to pick up some of the slack of what mulching would do, we're adding soil improving plants, stuff that is growing and decaying. Chop and drop is a pretty classic permaculture term. We've got comfrey in some of these orchards, and they're growing out of the plastic. Chop it, and you can spread that around the trees and continue to cycle nutrients through the orchard.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Mary Jo, I hope that helped. The next question comes from Susie. Susie says, and I quote, "This is very exciting, the diversity and sustainability exclamation point. Here's the question. I want to replace lawn under existing pines, maple trees, and a sweet gum. I prefer evergreen since I have a long, narrow lot. So can you recommend, first question within the question, number one, an evergreen that is at least 7 to 10 feet tall, that's long and narrow for the borders? And then the second question within the question is, she's curious about essentially the companion plants or the lower height plants, perhaps natives, that she could do underneath the maples and pines and the sweet gum. I will start with Chris, but Doug, I'd like your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I saw this question come in, and I was first wanting to understand lawn under pines, because pines tend to form colonies and groves. Permaculture, I think a couple filters tend to pop up as most predominant, and one is an analog of, or a binary, sun or shade. Like, what are we working with? there's so many other patterns that can work in one and not the other. So without really knowing the full context, and I'll just say right here just a little bit about a holistic permaculture design process really is difficult to like answer one-off random questions. A classic answer or response in permaculture is it depends, because it depends on 30 factors. And if you don't tell me every single 30 in sequence, and I trust reliably that you understand the implications of each of those things, it's crazy talking to other farmers, because like the first 10 minutes is just a preamble on your site, your latitude, your soils, water, vegetation. It's just like, and then you've said hello. So just that's just a general understanding of when getting into those kind of like, hey, I want to figure out a plant choice for this, to funnel all of the best versions of those vectors into that question as you can.
Good point. Doug, would you recommend, do you have any recommendations here? Specifically, you know, she's looking for an evergreen. And then she's curious about plants that would go with maples and a sweet gum.
Yeah, I'm not so well versed in the evergreen arborvitae that kind of screening plant, but other nurseries would be for sure. We don't sell anything like that, so I'm sure there's a plant out there that would fit your needs. Lower height plants that are going to be, again, is it on the east side where there's a little bit of light? Is it the north side? So this question is a bit tough to answer, but if you want to throw in some let's say lower berry plants that deal with some of the shade, I can recommend currants, I can recommend gooseberries, and I can recommend honeyberries. And I quite like those edible landscaping plants, and some are native, although the nativeness of them has somewhat been bred out by plant breeding, to be honest. Even though a currant is native, it was taken back to Europe and plant bred quite a bit. There's also chokeberry, that's quasi-native as well, that could go in that situation.
Thank you, Doug and Chris. Doug, next question's for you, coming from Charlie Gonzalez. He's curious about, do you practice or plan to implement additional forms of aquaculture in the lake? And ultimately, he wants to know your long-term vision for the spot.
Yeah, so as far as aquaculture, you know, we used to run a pay fishing lake here, which was the form of aquaculture, which we did do some stocking. So we would buy from other hatcheries, which is essentially like a nursery. Jones Fish Hatchery out there in Newtown, we would buy bass and bluegill and crappie from, and we would buy catfish from the river catfish farmers. I went and placed the order from Jones, and I studied aquaculture, my degree of fish and wildlife management, and I kind of knew the industry a little bit, but I was exploring their barn while I was waiting on something, and I looked at the fish food and I said, never again will I buy this, because it's purina. It's just full of chemicals and steroids and antibiotics and whatnot. And then the catfish come from the Ohio River and the Kentucky River, which are overfished for pay lakes. And essentially what most pay fishing lakes are trying to be is a confined animal feed operation, like a pig lot. And so imagine going wild boar hunting in a pig lot. Like, you'd probably have success. And that's what a pay lake has become, especially in like the eastern northern parts of Cincinnati. So we got rid of that. So the fish are out there. If we want to catch them, we could do cage culture of something like catfish and feed them organic pelleted food and then market them to restaurants. We once had ducks, and that's definitely something that we would like to get back into, having taken on the chickens and the goats this year. And now having a herding dog, which would definitely help with the protection of the ducks, because they're quite easily picked off by the foxes when they come on land. But egg production from ducks and meat production would probably be the most likely source of aquaculture production from Treasure Lake. And the long-term vision of the lake is to continue to be an educational resource. I was just saying to a friend today that I was visiting, it's been a really tough year because when you set your farm up to be an educational resource and then that falls through, you really suffer because of the lack of community. Not so much the finances because, well, everybody's kind of suffering through that with COVID, most people, but the community aspect. And then, so we did the P word, we pivoted and we got deeper into some farming practices that I'd like to continue to explore and keep expanding that edge of how do we utilize animals to enhance our forest? How do we utilize these edge spaces along the lake to create these pocket orchards, which may look more similar to Chris's common orchard projects around the city than a normal orchard in a rural area, and definitely get into agroforestry systems like what Chris has explained with the chestnut project of getting keyline and working with our several acres of grasslands once the chickens and the goats have done their fertilization, but figure out how to keep integrating them.
Excellent, thank you. There's two more things I'd like to cover before I turn it over to Patricia. The first one is Mary says, in the past, I've worked with community greening initiatives. I've run into community resistance in terms of planting trees in shared spaces. She references a fear of bees. She also references a fear in terms of fruit dropping and the fact that fruit trees can make a mess. And I'll just say that I recently worked with Summit Country Day to plant some trees. And these were exactly their questions. Out on the playground, they have children, they are concerned about bees. And the questions came from the lawn maintenance crew, who then would go on to tell me that, they answer calls from teachers to get bees away from the playground a couple times a season. And I just had to very politely let them know that, we live in a world where pollinators are needed. And I understand that we have to keep them away from children and that this is a real challenge. And so we ended up locating the fruit trees a little bit further away than where the teachers had initially wanted. So it's essentially a conversation, it's a compromise, and it's people coming to and understanding that, maybe we won't do quite as many fruit trees as you wanted, but we should still do them. And yes, there might be a challenge with bees, but bees are not the only pollinators. There are other insects out there that do a lot of this work. And then finally, before I turn it over to Patricia, speaking of community, Doug, I would like to share with you, this is hot off the press. This is a graphic showcasing the permaculture history in our region. This was produced by Julia Glenn and an artist by the name of Ava, and I'm not going to get Ava's last name correct here, Whitston. And what this graphic shows you is it's highlighting the people who have been doing this work for 20, 35 years. Mary Lou Legman is one of our matriarchs. She is out at Grailville, which is in Loveland, and she has been working there. This is the Grail is it's a branch of the Catholic Church where a bunch of awesome, crazy, radical nuns broke off and have been doing a lot of deep spiritual work in terms of women and nature and healing the earth, and they've been transitioning Grailville. And then you have the fact that back in the early 90s, I'm just going to scroll down. And by the way, for those of you that were here for the first session, you see Amy over here, and you also see Braden, who were featured, and then you've got Chris and Doug. We are blessed in this region to have this many permaculturalists doing this amount of work, pulling knowledge from around the globe. And what this graphic does, it's meant to be a huge poster, by the way, but it does work here on the computer screen. You have to understand that this movement in our region goes back to the 90s, which is only 10, 11 years past the point of which permaculture was introduced as a thing. And this graphic showcases people people's development, people's education, organizational development in terms of creating nonprofits, in terms of creating collaborations. It talks about when they earn their PDCs or their teacher PDCs, who's teaching whom, who's learning from whom, who's traveling where. And ultimately, the goal for this network and diagram is to show you that you have all of these options right here for you. So I would encourage the audience, and by the way, this is part of the Edible City Art Atlas project, and this will be featured in the book that we are producing, as well as some art shows, which, you know, someday we will again visit galleries. So without any more, I just wanted to give a brief showing of this. I'd be happy to share it to some extent. It will be shared with the regional permaculturalists in the hope that they pass this along to their networks. My hat is off to Julia and Ava. Thank you very much. And then obviously to all of the people in the diagram who provided the information in the interviews and essentially told the story to be visualized here. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Doug. Patricia, take it away.
Thank you all. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for participating in tonight's webinar as we bring science, art, and history to life. Watch social media and our website calendar for upcoming programs. And if you didn't catch it in the chat, our webinars are now available on our YouTube channel. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.